Let's pick up more on the story now. Gillian Maree is a senior researcher at the Gauteng City Region Observatory, looking at the issue of water, also the demand for water. Gillian, good afternoon to you. We heard from a water activist in Joburg just a few moments ago, placing part of the blame on the really rapid increase in his view of the number of people moving into certain parts of Joburg, and it's obvious there has been an increase. There's been an increase in the population in places like Cape Town and eThekwini as well. Can people just blame higher demand for the water problems that we're having, or are there other issues as well?
Hi, good afternoon, Stephen. No, we can't simply blame population. It's certainly a contributor. Household growth, social mobility, especially in Gauteng, where we know that we are having some economic growth and demand for water grows in as well. But broadly, the problems we're seeing now is really, it's what happens when we have water availability challenge that coincides with challenges around the infrastructure delivery as well. And when the two of those collide, when we have problems both with the availability of water and the infrastructure, we get this whole range of problems that we experience now. And I think some of the confusion is that the problems we're seeing at the moment, they're not all the same. So there's a range of different factors that feed into problems in different areas. Sometimes it's about demand, but very often it's not. So, for example, the first issue is around electricity supply. Because we live on the top of a watershed, we rely on electricity to be able to pump water up into Gauteng. So when we have increasing supply challenges with Aikenhof, we have water supply problems. We also have, and I heard some of the issues around water maintenance. There's a huge problem with the backlog in water maintenance, the rising level of leaks that we have across all of the municipalities in Gauteng. All of that, it's often attributed to consumption, but really it's wasted water. Then the final reason that we need to put into the mix over here is climate change. We've come off 6 very hot weeks. And this year we've entered into an El Nino cycle. It's been significantly hotter than what we've seen in the past, and that always raises the demand from water. Ironically, we are lucky that the water that we have in the dams and the integrated bulk catchment system is relatively the same amount that we've had in previous years. So we do need to ask what's going to happen when next year this time, if we have another heat wave, increasing demand, and we haven't had good rains. So yes, some of the challenges are population related, but largely a lot of them are not. They're driven by this issue of the availability of water and the challenges around getting water from its sources into our homes.
We keep hearing, and it's quite difficult sometimes to look at where the problem actually is. Is it at Rand Water? Is it at City Power? Is it at Joburg Water? Is it with the water supply issues in Ekurhuleni or Tshwane? I wonder if there's more scope for the 3 metros to work together or sort of have some kind of unified system to dealing with some of these problems that would then maybe make it easier for Rand Water.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the critical challenges we have at the moment is intergovernmental collaboration. There's no way we achieve any kind of level of water security without having increased collaboration before them. And I think the mixed messages alone that we see coming out of these organizations is an indicator that there's a lot of work to be done in that area. If we just look at Cape Town and what happened around Day Zero and the amount of effort they put into governance structures and getting different departments to talk to each other. And I'll say here as well, it's not just about having Rand Water and water entities talk to each other. It's about all departments within these municipalities that have a role with water. It's the housing departments, it's communications, it's billing, it's the whole range of departments that need to be collaborating fairly frequently, particularly when we have times like this, to be able to properly identify exactly what the root cause is.
This business of unmetered water, and I mean the average in Gauteng is 42%, so this is water that just goes missing through leaks. In Mogale City it's about 50%, in Joburg it's around 42%, I think in Tshwane it's in the 30s, I think the low 30s. So we have big differences, but in Gauteng the figure is very high. I don't know if authorities really understand how serious this problem is. I mean, we could literally almost double the amount of water available to us if we fixed it.
Yeah. Exactly. I think there is some realization, particularly in water utilities, and there's a lot of concern around that. The difficulty is when you have a problem that's so big, where do you start? And that's often, I think, sometimes the conversations that happen. And if we listen to how much money is needed, I think Joburg said this week that something like 27 billion to look at maintenance, up to 3 billion a year. They only spend 1 billion. So it's a huge amount, and whether they can actually do that within the other budget allocations and pressures they have, I think that's where the message sometimes gets lost. But yes, the numbers are staggering, and the rate that they've increased over the last few years is equally worrying. I think the other challenge with this is taking very technical concepts like non-revenue water, economic losses, physical losses, and translating that into something that is meaningful and that is more easily understood around some of these decisions. And the way I think of it is it's like you go shopping. And half of, 20% of what you buy, you leave at the shop or somebody else takes, and the other half you lose because you have a hole in the bottom of your shopping bag. So every time you go and buy groceries, you walk away with half of it. That's exactly the problem that we're dealing with. And it's critical that we have to address this, because my concern is what happens in 6 months' time when demand increases as we go into the next summer. To what extent would we have started engaging with non-revenue water?
Occasionally, and I realize why political leaders do this. A political leader will be asked, is there a crisis? Is the water a crisis? Are the potholes a crisis? And they'll almost always say no, because no one wants to preside over a crisis. And if you declare a crisis, you actually have to do something about it, and that's a major problem. It is difficult to be a political leader. And the mayor of Joburg, Kabelo Gwamanda, said this week, there isn't a water crisis in Joburg. Now, you could argue, just with climate change, there's always going to be a water crisis. What I'm trying to get to is the issue of honesty. I was amazed that people, found his comment that a valve was in the wrong position so interesting, because it immediately led to questions around sabotage. How important is it for leaders to be completely honest about the problems we're facing?
It is critically important. You have to be communicating clearly to bring people along. Again, a good example is what happened in Cape Town around Day Zero and what we saw happening in Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape. You do not bring people along with you to help you solve this problem if you're blaming them for what's going wrong, or if you're denying what's going wrong, or if you're not adequately releasing information to back up the statements that you're making. There's a lot of lessons learned from Cape Town that behavior change happens when you're open and you're communicating and you're working hand in hand with both civil society and residents. So it's absolutely critical that we get that right. There's a challenge at the moment, you're correct, around governance. We're 2 months away from a really big election and coalition governments likely in many provincial governments. And I think that is going to add an extra challenge, because we need to be making really difficult decisions around allocating money and spending money on water infrastructure. And those are difficult decisions at a point where politicians would rather be worrying about other things.
Can leaders restore that trust? I think Sinzo Mqunu, the Water Affairs Minister, is trying to do that. He's talking about a radical program around infrastructure. And infrastructure, as always, anyone who's done a renovation for a home will know this, infrastructure is very difficult to actually redo. But I get some sense that there's urgency in some quarters of government.
Yeah, I think so. It's a pity that we've had to end up in this position for that to happen. The true test is going to be the measure of how we see that translate into budgets and projects over the next few months. We really need to have some kind of intervention that we see within the next year that we can actually start measuring this. I am encouraged as well that we have a number of more civil society activists and organizations that are being quite public now around trying to keep governments accountable, because that's how we're going to follow up and measure some of these statements that are being made. Of course, I think the big challenge with a lot of this is a lot of the infrastructure work is a local government responsibility. So the minister can certainly help and push, and I think is a really key role player. But the rubber hits the road with local government when it comes to water infrastructure. And don't forget, we're talking now about water supply, but the issues around the sanitation and wastewater treatment plants is just as bad. And we've kind of put that on the back burner at the moment while we're worrying about water supply. But we've got to have that on the agenda as well when we're talking about investments in infrastructure over the next few years.
Gillian, Maree, thank you very much indeed from Gauteng City Region Observatory. Important points to ponder, of course, in the issue around water.